Remember walking into your local co-op and feeling like you were stepping into a piece of British history? The familiar green and blue logo, the community dividend stamps, the sense that this wasn't just another shop, but something that belonged to you and your neighbours. For generations, the cooperative society was more than a retailer. It was a movement, a way of life, a beacon of working-class solidarity that promised to put people before profit. But then something went catastrophically wrong. So what really happened to the co-op? The truth is more shocking than you might imagine. Picture this. It's 1844 in Rochdale, a grimy industrial town in Lancashire, where mill workers barely earned enough to survive. 28 weavers, fed up with overpriced, watered-down goods from exploitative shop owners, pooled their meagre savings to open their own store. Their revolutionary idea was simple yet radical. Every customer would become a member, sharing in the profits based on how much they spent. This wasn't just commerce, this was rebellion against capitalism itself. Their timing couldn't have been more perfect. Victorian Britain was hungry for change as the Industrial Revolution created vast wealth for factory owners while workers struggled in squalid conditions. The Rochdale Pioneers, as they became known, sparked something extraordinary. Their modest shop on Toad Lane became the template for a movement that would transform British society. Within decades, cooperative stores were sprouting in every town and village across the nation. By the early 1900s, the co-op had become the largest retail organisation in the world. The movement's golden age stretched from the 1920s through the 1960s. Co-op stores dominated British high streets, offering everything from groceries to furniture, insurance to travel services. The dividend system meant families would eagerly save their stamps, looking forward to their annual payout like a second Christmas. For many working-class households, the co-op divvy was the only way they could afford a family holiday or new winter coats for the children. My grandmother still talks about queuing at the co-op on Saturday mornings, carefully counting her dividend stamps while chatting with neighbours about everything from rationing to the latest gossip. The staff knew every customer by name, remembered their preferences, and often extended credit to families going through hard times. This wasn't just shopping, this was community. But behind the friendly facade, storm clouds were gathering even during the supposedly prosperous post-war years. The co-op's democratic structure, once its greatest strength, was becoming its fatal weakness. Decisions that should have taken weeks were dragging on for months as committees debated endlessly. While nimble competitors like Tesco and Sainsbury's were revolutionizing retail with self-service stores and aggressive pricing, the co-op remained stuck in the past. The rot started at the very top. The movement had grown so large that local societies were merging into regional behemoths, losing that intimate community connection that had made them special. Managers who had never worked a day on the shop floor were making decisions about products and pricing that showed how disconnected they had become from their own members. The democratic ideals that had once driven innovation were now stifling progress at every turn. By the 1970s, the writing was on the wall. Supermarket chains were offering lower prices, better selection, and more convenient locations. The co-op's aging stores, with their narrow aisles and limited product ranges, looked increasingly shabby compared to the gleaming new retail parks sprouting on the outskirts of towns. Market share began hemorrhaging as younger customers abandoned the movement their parents and grandparents had supported religiously. The 1980s brought even more devastating challenges. Margaret Thatcher's deregulation of financial services opened the door for banks and building societies to compete aggressively with the co-op's traditional insurance and banking operations. The movement's ethical stance, once a source of pride, became a commercial liability as shareholders demanded maximum profits regardless of social consequences. Internal politics became increasingly toxic as different factions fought for control. Progressive leaders who wanted to modernize clashed with traditionalists determined to preserve the cooperative principles at all costs. Meanwhile, customers were voting with their feet, deserting co-op stores for retailers who understood what modern shoppers actually wanted. The travel business, once a jewel in the co-op crown that had introduced millions of Britons to foreign holidays, was hemorrhaging money as package tour operators undercut their prices. The insurance arm was struggling against aggressive competitors who could offer better rates without the burden of democratic decision-making processes. But the most shocking revelations were yet to come. Behind the scenes, financial mismanagement on an almost unimaginable scale was threatening the very existence of this 150-year-old institution. Reckless investments, failed mergers, and a corporate culture that prioritized politics over performance had created a perfect storm that would ultimately expose corruption reaching the highest levels of the organization. The truth about what really happened to the co-op involves scandal, betrayal, and criminal behavior that would have been unthinkable to those original Rochdale pioneers. A story of how idealism was corrupted by greed, how democracy was hijacked by self-serving individuals, and how one of Britain's most trusted institutions nearly collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. The first major crack in the co-op's facade appeared in 2008 when the movement made what would prove to be a catastrophic decision. Desperate to remain relevant in an increasingly competitive market, they embarked on an aggressive expansion strategy that defied all common sense. The acquisition of the Summerfield supermarket chain for £1.57 billion was supposed to transform the co-op into a retail powerhouse capable of competing with the big four supermarkets. Instead, it became a financial albatross that nearly sank the entire organization. The due diligence process was woefully inadequate, missing critical problems with Summerfield's aging IT systems and deteriorating store estate. Integration costs spiraled out of control as two incompatible business cultures clashed spectacularly. Stores that should have been profitable were losing money hand over fist, while promised synergies failed to materialize. But the Summerfield disaster was just the beginning. In 2009, the co-op made an even more reckless gamble by merging with Britannia Building Society. On paper, it looked like a perfect match. The Building Society's 2.9 million members would boost the co-op's customer base while providing access to a broader range of financial services. What they didn't anticipate was inheriting a toxic portfolio of commercial property loans that would soon explode like a financial time bomb. The merger created the Cooperative Bank, an institution that would become synonymous with one of the most spectacular corporate scandals in British history. Hidden within Britannia's loan book were hundreds of millions of pounds worth of bad debts tied to overvalued commercial properties. As the economic downturn deepened, these loans began defaulting at an alarming rate, creating a massive hole in the bank's balance sheet. Meanwhile, the retail operation was hemorrhaging cash as the Summerfield integration continued to unravel. Promised cost savings never materialized, while customer service standards plummeted. Shelves were frequently empty, prices were uncompetitive, and staff morale hit rock bottom. The co-op's reputation for quality and reliability, built up over more than a century, was crumbling before customers' eyes. The democratic's greatest strength now became its fatal weakness. Critical decisions were delay governance structure that had once been the movement for months, as committees debated endlessly while competitors seized market share. Board meetings descended into factional warfare as different groups pursued their own agendas rather than focusing on the organization's survival. By 2012, the financial situation had become desperate. The Co-op Bank needed an urgent capital injection of £1.5 billion to meet regulatory requirements, but the parent organisation simply didn't have that kind of money. Years of poor investment decisions, failed acquisitions, and operational mismanagement had left the movement financially crippled and facing potential bankruptcy. The crisis deepened when regulators began scrutinising the bank's loan practices more closely. What they discovered was a culture of reckless lending that had ignored basic risk management principles. Loans had been approved without proper documentation, credit checks were inadequate, and oversight was virtually non-existent. The bank had essentially been gambling with members' money while pretending to uphold cooperative values. As if the financial crisis wasn't damaging enough, the co-op was about to be engulfed in a scandal that would destroy what remained of its reputation. In November 2013, the Reverend Paul Flowers, who had been chairman of the Co-op Bank despite having no banking experience whatsoever, was caught on camera allegedly buying illegal drugs. The man who had been preaching ethical banking and cooperative values was exposed as a fraud whose personal conduct was completely at odds with everything the movement claimed to represent. The Flowers scandal opened the floodgates to even more damaging revelations about the co-op's leadership culture. Investigations revealed a toxic environment where unqualified individuals had been appointed to senior positions based on political connections rather than competence. Board members were more interested in preserving their own status than serving the organization's members. The democratic principles that were supposed to ensure accountability had been corrupted by self-serving politicians who treated the co-op as their personal fiefdom. The regulatory investigations that followed painted a picture of an organization that had completely lost its way. Corporate governance was non-existent, financial controls were inadequate, and senior managers seemed more concerned with their expense accounts than their members' interests. The movement that had once stood for working-class solidarity and mutual cooperation had become a byword for corporate greed and incompetence. But perhaps the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As forensic accountants dug deeper into the co-op's finances, they uncovered evidence of systematic fraud and embezzlement that stretched back years. So what really happened to the co-op? The shocking truth is that one of Britain's most beloved institutions was destroyed not by market forces or changing consumer habits, but by the very people entrusted to protect it. The movement that began with 28 honest weavers in Rochdale was brought to its knees by corruption, incompetence, and breathtaking arrogance at the highest levels. The co-op still exists today, a shadow of its former self, struggling to rebuild trust and relevance in a retail landscape it helped create but can no longer dominate. Those familiar green and blue shop fronts remain scattered across Britain's high streets, serving communities that remember when the co-op meant something more than just another place to buy groceries. For those who remember the dividend stamps and Saturday morning queues, the co-op's downfall represents more than just corporate failure. It symbolizes the death of an ideal, the corruption of a dream that promised ordinary people could build something better than pure capitalism. The Rochdale pioneers believed in putting people before profit, but their successors chose personal gain over collective good. The co-op story serves as a powerful reminder that even the most noble institutions can be corrupted when democratic accountability fails and self-interest trumps public service. Sometimes the most shocking truth isn't what happened, but how easily we allowed it to happen.